would gladly move to approve um, appointment process and move to approve an interview process and the slate of applicants: Kelly Green, Jennifer Riedmeyer, Daniel Garcia, Bridget Valdez-Kogel, Isaac Wagnitz, Tanzania Zinzali Marshall, Zachary Lynch, and Timothy Leadingham, to move forward for interviews to fill the vacant city council position number 5 seat via ranked choice voting.
So just a few things I just kind of wanted to mention at the top to kind of help get us started with this conversation. So we did just do this just a year ago, by the way, and we have Councilmember Vanderpool now as a result of doing this process. There's actually a handful of steps that I think will help us sort of move through the conversation. The first is to decide on the number of applicants. Then decide who to interview, then decide how we want to conduct those interviews, as Kelly said. Then we make a decision on the ranked choice voting recommendation, whether or not we will stick with that, and then we will make a motion to adopt the slate of candidates that we select for interview. So that's just kind of to summarize just how the flow of the discussion. I do want to mention that this is only for deciding who to interview. We will not be discussing the questions that we'll be asking of the candidates or any of the nature of the topics or anything like that this evening. This is just to decide who to interview and how. So with that, happy to turn it over to anyone who'd like to discuss the number of applicants. I will say earlier today in agenda setting, it was mentioned that the first 8 candidates were on the list that we were sent via email by Kelly. Thank you, Kelly, by the way, for consolidating all of our rankings to give us an idea of where we were mostly aligned. And the top 8 were where we were closely aligned. And so therefore that's sort of a number that we could throw out there in terms of how many candidates to interview. I do see that as a reasonable amount, and it is one more additional person. If you were to look at the number of council members, for example, there are 7 members. We will interview 8 candidates. So I think that is sort of one way of looking at why we would choose that number. So it'd be one additional candidate into the number of council positions. And then there's also, just to really think about how we've ranked the applicants, where we're mostly aligned, and if whether or not it makes sense to offer those candidates to interviews. So any thoughts on that? Councilmember Gilman.
I just, as I look at the numbers, I don't see that it's 8 that are most closely aligned. I see it's 10, and then there's a jump. But that the 9th and 10th person are closer in the grouping than some of the gaps between the first 8. So I would just suggest that they're actually, and so we can decide whether or not it's unwieldy to consider 10 people, but I would say that there's 10 that are bunched sort of together.
Yes. Here. Councilmember Vanderpool.
Before can I ask the question, if it's possible, if we do 8 or we do 10, would we do that in 2 sets, or would we do that? So that's time-wise, that's the thing I'm thinking about. If we did 5 people seating versus.
Yes, that's the next part of the discussion once we decide how many we think is appropriate to interview for the position. Yeah, we'll get there.
Okay.
Yep. So thank you for that clarification, Councilmember Gilman. So there are 10 applicants where we're mostly aligned, but what we did discuss in agenda setting was the number 8. And I tend to think of it for the reasons that I just stated earlier, but sure, I'm open to obviously interviewing 10 if we feel like that's where we want to go, but certainly open to hearing different thoughts. 8, 10? Any thoughts? Anyone?
Mayor,
Yes.
yeah,
Councilmember Cooper.
thank you, Mayor Payne. 10 is a lot. Like if I was doing a hiring, I would go for 5 or 6. And I feel like in the 5 or 6 range is, I mean, it's hard because they're kind of tight. So, I mean, if people want to do 8 or 10, it's certainly not out of precedent for us. Like, I think the mayor pro tem reminded me we invited 6 people last year and only 4 showed up for the interview. But I believe when we appointed Councilmember Gilman, we had 2 panels of people and it was like we interviewed 10 or more maybe. Does that sound right to your recollection? Like we can fit that in a night is just what my mind is doing.
I believe you had 3 panels on that night, 3 panels of 4.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we interviewed 12 people. Yeah. Okay, and I think it was similar when we did Councilmember Hankins. So I like it. It was a clearer choice and an easier. It's easier to make the decision with a smaller group of really qualified people, in my opinion. But if people want to do 8 or 10, that's totally reasonable.
City Manager Bernie.
Would it help to put the rankings that you're all talking about up on the screen so those that are watching at
You
home
beat me to it. I was
can
just
see
going
what you're
to.
talking about?
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm. So, okay, that's a great point. A smaller, qualified pool makes sense as well. Councilmember Madrone.
The middle ground here seems to be 8. Because last time we did this, we had somebody cancel last minute because they were sick and somebody else cancel last minute for an unknown reason. And then we ended up with a smaller group of people to evaluate from. I think there's a little bit of, just a little bit of a buffer in there. If we do have a couple of people who just can't make it at the last minute.
I like that. Thank you. Councilmember Gilman.
I was just wondering, Mr. Mayor, if you were going to comment on the depth and the interest across these 22 applicants and how, I mean, we could, there's something interesting about all 22 people. So we have to choose, but I just thought, if you wanted to praise this whole list and the people who took the time to apply, that'd be all right.
Yeah, I figured we would get there at the conclusion of the discussion, and maybe get there once we decide on process, and then we can talk about the quality of candidates we got and then wrap up the conversation that way. But yes, thank you. That's a good point. We always want to acknowledge the folks that took the time to actually apply. Yes, so I like the idea of where we're going with 8 applicants, considering we need a few extra, but also a middle ground between what I'm hearing of 6 and 10. So are we aligned with 8?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So next is to decide which 8 candidates to interview. And Councilmember Gilman, you just raised a good point that obviously we don't necessarily want to go in consecutive order of 1 through 8, maybe because the candidates that were 9 and 10 are closely ranked, maybe more than some of the others. So to that point, we need to make a decision of who to interview in those 8 slots. Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen.
I'd be happy for it to just be randomized. It could be. No, I'm interpreting the mayor as saying we are selecting the top 8, and then within the 8, how to split them between 2 panels. Is that what you're saying?
Not quite. So, but yes, I am open to that, but we're not there yet. Right now, we just need to decide who to interview. And from my understanding, from what Councilmember Gilman was saying, is that the candidates that are 9 and 10 on the list are actually ranked closer by the way that council has ranked them than the first 8. And so, for example, if we just went, okay, so we're going to interview 1 through 8, does that make sense if 9 and 10 are more closely ranked. So just food for thought on what we want to do here. Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen.
Thank you for the clarification, Mayor. May I revise my comments? Um, so I really appreciate that we took the time to rank all of the applicants and not just put forward who we thought the tops were, because we did have some varying rankings here, and so. I'm seeing on the total rankings, and in this case, the lower numbers being the top candidates, and so I would just propose going 1 through 8, and see if anyone has any comments there. But to me, we've all taken the time to rank them, and those are the calculated totals. I think it makes the most sense to just 1 through 8.
Okay, I'm seeing some head nods. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen. Thumbs up. All right, so we will interview the first 8 candidates that are listed. So with that being said, we need to decide how to conduct the interview panels. So last year when we had this discussion, we had the conversation about how to conduct the panels, whether we should have all the applicants on one or if we should split them up. And last year we decided to have 6 applicants on one panel. So we have 8 this time. And my recommendation would be to split those into panels, 2 panels of 4. So any thoughts on that? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'm seeing head nods and thumbs up. So we will split them into 2 panels of 4, and we will decide who are on those panels randomly. So in addition to this part of the discussion, one of the things that needs to be very clear, and we discussed this in agenda setting as well, is that we want to create an environment where it's fair for all of the candidates that are being interviewed. So we would obviously have a holding room for the candidates who are, for example, on the second panel to be interviewed, so that they're being monitored. They're not watching the interviews from another device or something to that effect, because it is a public meeting, and so it's a public process. And so that way it's fair across the board for all the candidates that are participating. And so they will sit in a holding room while the first panel is being interviewed, and then we will switch out. The other thing we discussed is the brutal process that we did last year was when we used ranked choice voting, and then we decided that we would do that process right in front of the candidates. So this time around, what we will do is excuse that second panel after we are finished interviewing them, and both of those panels can sit in the holding room until we go through our voting process. And then we will call the candidates back once a decision is made to announce our decision. So, yes, Councilmember Gilman.
So help me to understand, is it an executive session? How is it that they're excluded from the conversations? What I watched was vote after vote as they were narrowing it down to me and one other person to choose. And I thought it was a public deliberation, so I'm trying to.
It is a public deliberation amongst the council, but what we're doing is looking after the candidates and not putting them through the process of actually watching the voting take place in a public meeting right then and there. They will be in the holding room, and the public obviously can still see that process, and the candidates will be able to see it on a recording after the fact. But they don't need to sit there in real time and watch us do the voting and deciding who is going to be selected as the council member for the seat. So that's what I think will be the best approach to doing that process this time around. Something we've learned from the last time we appointed a council member who sat through that in real time and watched. Sure. Sure. But you got appointed, so we're looking out for everyone. Yes, City Manager Bernie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The city attorney was poking me as we were having this conversation and was thinking about it since we had our conversation at noon. Another way you might consider this is to make it optional. So you could let the candidates know that if they want to stay and watch the voting, they can, or they may retire to another room if they don't want to do that. That way, no one can say that they were excluded from a public process in any way. It's just another way you could think about it. And then, yeah, maybe they're not at the table. They're not sitting at the table. They can be out in the audience while you do your voting. So they're kind of dismissed, and it's at their option whether they want to stay in the room or leave while you vote.
I appreciate that. Thank you. All right. So any additional thoughts on process of how we'll conduct the interviews? Okay. Yes, Councilmember Gilman.
Full of questions tonight, I apologize, but will we do the ranked choice after hearing the two panels, or will we narrow it down and have a lightning round with finalists? That we've done both over the years, so.
Well, that's the next part of our discussion,
Oh,
which
that-
is
okay.
which is whether or not we're going to go with the ranked choice voting recommendation from the subcommittee.
Okay.
Councilmember Madrone.
Well, and we also discussed, doing the interviews and then having a moment for us to go into executive session so that we can deliberate on what we heard and then we take our vote. So there'll be an opportunity for that. That's what we did last time. Yeah. And if at that moment, we choose like, hey, we kind of want to hear from some of them a little bit more, we could do it at that time.
Yes. And just for those who are watching and listening, the reason for an executive session at that time would be to discuss qualifications of the finalists at that time. So how do we feel about using our approach that we've done for the past several appointments of using ranked choice voting? Yes, Councilmember Cooper.
I was wondering after our experience last year if there's a moment in time before it's revealed, if we could talk about qualifications or something and see the tie situation and have a conversation about how to move forward. Because I don't necessarily, even though I was on the prevailing side of the vote, appreciate ranked choice vote making a tiebreaker with only 6 voters. Like that is not necessarily the best outcome for me. We got a great council member out of it, but it's the only time of the 2 times that we've used it that there's been a tie. And so I just wanted to talk about that and make sure we understand how we want to deal with it. Because, my thought would be to get to the top 2 and then vote again or do another quick panel. But that's just my impression, because I wouldn't have gone home if I was not on the prevailing side last year. I would have wanted to keep talking.
It's a fair point. Thank you, Councilmember Cooper. Councilmember Madrone.
I was not on the prevailing side, no offense. And I was very glad to have ranked choice voting break the tie for us instead of having us sit in executive session for however long it took for one person to change their mind, because it is 6 people. And so we could stay in a deadlock until somebody feels like they have to change their mind just to be able to go home. So in my mind, ranked choice voting creates more an easier way for us to come to a decision if it is a close vote.
It's a very good point. Councilmember Vanderpool.
If it comes to an exact tie, my recommendation would be to do more interview questions with those 2 people at that point. But otherwise, I think the ranked choice, just follow the ranked choice rules. That's just my recommendation.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments on this one? Well, I would say that I think you all raise great points. I think deciding to use ranked choice voting personally to break the tie sounds like the best approach to take using this process. I don't know how I feel about asking an additional set of questions to break the tie, because I think the numbers do that for us. Uh, right. I don't necessarily feel like I need to ask more questions to break a tie, but that's my 2 cents. If anyone else has thoughts, Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen.
Yeah, great discussion. Clearly, we really care about how this process is coming out. Um, uh, I'd love to take a little bit of what the mayor had said, a little bit of what other council members have said, and propose that we do ranked choice voting and let that ultimately be the tiebreaker. I think it's a clean process. I think the numbers will, even I think part of what's baked into ranked choice voting is I don't foresee us having a tie situation. And if it does, then we'll go into executive session, and I think that we'll figure it out then.
Yes, Councilmember Cooper.
I should point out too, I think part of the problem, not a problem, but the reason we ended up, it was easier to get a tie, I think, because there was only 4 candidates in the pool too. So bringing 8 people forward might help that. So I appreciate the discussion. I still want to do, what the group wants. I just wanted to make sure that we talked about it and thought it through, because if we're evenly divided, I think the voters expect that it's our job for somebody to vote to make a majority.
Yeah.
And we're doing that by agreeing that we'll accept the tie-breaking methodology from ranked choice voting.
Right. Because we didn't agree to do that until it happened last time. Yeah. So this time we're doing that ahead of time. So that is a process improvement. Yeah. Thank you, Councilmember Cooper. Any additional comments? All right. Seeing none, I saw some thumbs up and head nods about going with the subcommittee's recommendation to use ranked choice voting to select the next appointed council member through this process. Okay. So any additional comments from council on the applicants or anything that you wanted to speak to? Anyone? I will just say, first of all, I was very pleased to see that we had this many people that were interested in the vacant seat. I wasn't expecting it to be more than what we've had before. So that was really encouraging to see. I really appreciate the number of people that have come forward to apply. I was just speaking with Councilmember Cooper a few moments ago before the start of the meeting, and one of the things that I noticed was the number of applicants that had some sort of background in education, and I found that very intriguing. And the number of applicants that mentioned they're concerned for our schools, which obviously shows that they're concerned for our youth. And while our schools are governed by a different body, it doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have sort of some sort of a role in terms of how we engage with our school district, our colleagues that are on the board. And so I was looking for that in some of the responses of the applicants and the applications. So I really appreciated the thought of specifically really forward thinking in terms of caring about Olympia's youth and the future of our schools and our community. That stood out very clearly to me amongst this list of applicants. Another thing that I will say is that we're incredibly gifted and have a high number of qualified people who clearly could do this job as well as many others in the city. So we will be having our process for the city's advisory boards and commissions that will be going through this process in the coming months, where we'll have vacancies that we need to fill. And I encourage all of the applicants and ultimately those who are not selected for interview or ultimately appointed to really consider serving on one of the city's boards and commissions. We could use your expertise. I would say that if you are willing to serve here on council, then certainly you would have something to contribute and offer on one of our boards and commissions to ultimately advise the council. And so I just appreciate the number of folks that have come forward and identifying different reasons and issues for why they are seeking the appointment, ranging from addressing housing and homelessness to addressing our local economy, and to addressing, to improving aspects of public safety in our community. All of that came through very clearly in our community, or excuse me, in some of the responses. It was clear to me that that there were some applicants that were very much paying attention to what we've done over the last year here at the city, specifically as it relates to the budget. It was very clear that there were a number of applicants who understood where we were at this time financially as a city. And in my opinion, I think that's very important for the next appointed member to have that as they step into that context and understanding as they step into the role of council member. So with that, are there any additional thoughts on the applicants that we got? Councilmember Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Payne. I was thinking about that. I think this is my 5th appointment that I've participated in, and I agree with you. This is by far the most qualified, air quotes, because we all know the only qualification is to be a registered voter in the city. But it's a really deep pool, and I think easily 2/3 of these people could walk into this job, learn it, and do as good as any of us. And so that's really encouraging, and I'm really excited about interviewing the top 8 because and it's an amazing set of people. So can I make a motion?
I believe Mayor Pro Tem, she has the motion in front of her.
Perfect.
And I do want to mention that we are to list the candidates by name within the motion so that we are very clear on who we will be interviewing next Monday.
Thank you for the kind reminder, Mayor. I would gladly move to approve appointment process and move to approve an interview process and the slate of applicants: Kelly Green, Jennifer Riedmeyer, Daniel Garcia, Bridget Valdez-Kogel, Isaac Wagnitz, Tanzania Zinzali Marshall, Zachary Lynch, and Timothy Leadingham, to move forward for interviews to fill the vacant city council position number 5 seat via ranked choice voting.
Is there a second?
Second.
There is a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And again, I just want to express our congratulations to the candidates that have been selected for an interview, and we look forward to our discussion with you next Monday at 6 p.m. We will be conducting those interviews here in the council chambers on Monday, January 13th. All right. So that concludes our business on item 6A for this evening. We will go ahead